Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we are going to get right into the science of turning those tougher, more budget-friendly cuts of meat into something that is absolutely tender and delicious. We're going to break down why meat gets tough, and more importantly, how to fix it so you can head into the kitchen with total confidence. You know the feeling, right? We've all been there. You spend good money and your precious time on what looks like a great piece of meat, you cook it just right, and it still ends up being chewy and, well, just a letdown. It is so frustrating. But what if I told you that toughness isn't just bad luck? Nope, it's science. And we can totally use that science to our advantage. Okay, so to win this battle against tough meat, you first have to know your enemy. And it turns out the texture of pretty much any cut of meat comes down to two main things, two molecular culprits. Understanding these two is the absolute key to picking the right strategy to make your meat tender. So on one side, you've got the muscle fibers, and on the other, you have connective tissue. These are the two bad guys responsible for that chewy steak or stringy roast. And listen, here's the most important thing to remember. You can't treat them the same way. A method that works wonders on one will completely fail on the other. First up, let's talk muscle fibers. Think of these as super tightly packed bundles of protein that make up, the actual meat. The problem is, when you add heat, these fibers clench up, they contract, and they squeeze out all that precious moisture. It's like wringing out a sponge. And that's exactly why a lean steak can go from perfectly juicy to bone dry in a flash. The more a muscle gets used, like in the shoulders or legs, the denser and tougher these fibers are going to be. All right, now for culprit number 2, connective tissue. This is basically the biological scaffolding that holds all those muscle fibers in place, and its main ingredient is a super tough protein called collagen. Now, cuts from the hard-working parts of the animal, like a brisket or a chuck roast, are just loaded with this stuff. That's why they start out so incredibly tough. But here's the secret. For these cuts, the goal isn't to fight the collagen, it's to transform it. Okay, now that we know what we're dealing with, let's start building our arsenal of techniques. We're going to start with what I like to call the brawn methods. These are all about using direct physical force and good old-fashioned heat to literally beat the toughness out of the meat. The classic meat mallet. This is pure brute force tenderizing. You cover the meat, you grab that spiky side, and you're literally just smashing and severing those tough muscle fibers before they even see the heat. Then you flip it over to the flat side to pound it into a nice, uniform thickness. And that right there is the secret to getting things like schnitzel or chicken parm to cook perfectly evenly. Now for a more, let's say, surgical approach, you have the blade tenderizer. This thing uses dozens of tiny little razors to pierce the meat. It severs both the muscle fibers and some of that connective tissue, but without mashing your steak into a pancake. And there's a huge bonus. All those tiny little cuts become super highways for your marinade, letting all that amazing flavor get deep inside the meat way faster than normal. Okay, hang on, because this is a really, really important safety warning that comes with using these blade tenderizers. That piercing action can actually push any bacteria that's on the surface of the meat down deep into the interior. So the rule is simple, and it is not optional. Any meat that has been mechanically tenderized must be cooked to an internal temp of at least 145 degrees Fahrenheit to be safe. No exceptions. Now let's talk about the ultimate weapon against our other culprit, that tough collagen. And that weapon is low and slow cooking. See, when you take a tough, collagen-heavy cut like a pork shoulder and you cook it at a low temperature for hours and hours, something incredible happens. That tough collagen doesn't just break down. It literally melts and transforms into rich, silky gelatin. And that gelatin coats all the muscle fibers, giving you that incredibly moist, fall-off-the-bone tender result we're all after. So we've covered the brawn, right? Now let's get into the brains of the operation. These are the biochemical methods where we let things like enzymes and acids do all the hard work for us, right down at the molecular level. You know, Mother Nature actually gives us some seriously powerful tenderizers right in the fruit aisle. We're talking about enzymes like papain from papaya and bromelain from pineapple. These things are called proteases, which is just a fancy way of saying their entire job is to dissolve protein chains. But what's really interesting is that they don't do much at room temperature. They actually kick into high gear when you start to cook the meat. That's why a lot of tenderizers work best right before the meat hits the heat. Now, these enzymes are so good at their job, maybe a little too good. They don't have an off switch, so they come with one major risk. What do you think happens if you leave your steak marinating in pineapple juice for way too long? Yep, you guessed it. Mushy meat. If you overdo it, those enzymes will just keep on dissolving the protein structure until the outside of your meat turns into this weird, mealy, unappetizing paste. So when you're using these enzyme marinades, trust me, timing is everything. Less is definitely more. So what about the acids you find in marinades, like lemon juice or vinegar? How do they work? Well, they use a process called denaturation. The best way to think about it is to imagine a protein is like a tiny, tightly coiled up spring. The acid comes in and causes that spring to unwind and relax. A relaxed, unwound protein structure means more tender meat. It's a bit gentler than enzymes, but you still have to be careful. Too much acid can actually make the surface tough. There are a couple of other chemical wizards you should definitely have in your toolkit. First is salt, which is used for dry brining. It first pulls moisture out of the meat, dissolves in it, and then that super concentrated salty brine gets reabsorbed, breaking down proteins and helping the meat stay juicier. And then you've got baking soda. This is the secret behind that velveting technique in Chinese cooking. It raises the pH on the surface, which stops the proteins from squeezing out all their water, giving you that super silky texture in stir fries. Okay, wow, we've covered a ton of ground here, right? From mallets to marinades. So what's the big takeaway from all this? It's that there is no single best way to tenderize meat. The real secret, the key to mastering this, is learning how to choose the right tool for the right job. And this chart really lays out that whole strategy perfectly. Look at a chuck roast. It's loaded with collagen. So your only real move is low and slow cooking to melt all that down into gelatin. But then you take a flank steak. Its problem is tough muscle fibers. So an acidic marinade or a good pounding with a mallet is the perfect solution. And check out the ribeye. It's already tender. So you're not trying to tenderize it, you're just trying to boost the flavor, which makes a simple salt brine the perfect choice. See how it works? Awesome. So before you race off to the kitchen, let's just lock in a few final rules of engagement. Think of these as the non-negotiable best practices that are going to make sure your results are not just delicious, but also 100% safe. Rule number 1, and I cannot stress this enough. Always, always, always marinate your meat in the refrigerator. Leaving it on the counter, even for just a little bit, is like rolling out the welcome mat for all sorts of nasty bacteria. It is just not worth the risk. Keep it cold. Rule number 2, as soon as your meat comes out of the marinade, that marinade is now considered contaminated with raw meat juice. The safest thing to do? Just throw it out. Now, the only exception is if you want to turn it into a sauce. If you do that, you absolutely must bring it to a hard rolling boil for at least a full minute to make sure you kill anything harmful. And finally, our last pro tip, rule number 3. Right before that meat hits the pan, pat the surface completely dry with paper towels. You have to remember, moisture is the enemy of a good sear. A dry surface is what lets you get that beautiful, deep brown, flavorful crust. Don't skip this step. So there you have it. The science, the strategies, and the safety rules. You now have a full arsenal of techniques to go out there and confidently tackle any cut of meat. So the only real question left is, what tough cut are you going to transform first? Thanks so much for tuning in.